At 42, my life shattered when my IVF report revealed my baby's biological mother wasn't an anonymous donor, but Victoria Sterling, the ruthless, Ice Queen CEO who had made my professional career a living hell for the past 10 years. As I sat frozen in the sterile clinic, bracing for the inevitable corporate wrath and a battery of lawyers, the heavy door swung open and Victoria stepped effortlessly inside. I instinctively shielded my flat stomach, bracing for her to demand determination, but the billionaire powerhouse did the unthinkable. She dropped to her knees right in front of my chair. Gently tracing the racing pulse on my wrist, her piercing Nordic blue eyes locked onto mine with a fierce, raw sincerity that completely short-circuited my brain. "Why would you assume I want to destroy this, Claire?" she murmured, her smooth voice entirely stripped of its usual mocking edge. "You might hate me, but I have spent 10 long years ruthlessly chasing your undivided attention, and I cannot think of a more perfect, brilliant woman to carry my child. Welcome to Luna's secret library. Sometimes the most unexpected turns lead us exactly where we need to be. What happens next is something I never saw coming, and I think you'll find it just as surprising. Stick around for the conclusion. It's a reminder that it's never too late for a new chapter. If you enjoy discovering these hidden gems, I'd be honored to have you follow for more." At 42, my carefully curated life shattered completely inside a sterile white doctor's office. The clinic director could barely look me in the eye when he delivered the devastating news. A catastrophic clerical error had occurred during my IVF procedure last month. The viable embryo growing inside me did not belong to my carefully selected anonymous donor. It belonged to Victoria Sterling. Victoria was the ruthless CEO of the most powerful architectural firm in the city. She was also the woman who had made my professional life an absolute living hell for the past 10 years. My blood ran entirely cold as the reality of the situation crashed over me. Victoria was a striking woman known for her piercing pale blue eyes and icy blonde hair. She possessed an elegant, lean physique that naturally commanded every boardroom she ever entered. At 44, she was widely considered the untouchable ice queen of the real estate industry. Now, by some cruel twist of fate, I was carrying her biological child. The doctor frantically babbled about legal settlements and termination options. I could not hear a single word over the deafening ringing in my ears. I had wanted a family of my own so desperately. I had spent my entire adult life building my independent career just to finally afford this chance at motherhood. Now, this innocent baby was irreversibly tied to my absolute worst enemy. The heavy oak door of the office suddenly swung open without a single knock. Victoria stepped effortlessly into the room. She wore a sharply tailored charcoal suit that perfectly accentuated her athletic grace. There was no visible anger on her usually stoic, flawless face. Instead, there was an intense, completely unreadable emotion swimming in those striking Nordic eyes. The clinic director practically tripped over his own feet trying to leave the two of us alone. The door clicked shut with a terrifying finality. The silence in the small room immediately became suffocating. I braced my tense body for her inevitable corporate wrath. I expected her to instantly demand a merciless battery of corporate lawyers. I assumed she would just hand me a blank check to make this massive inconvenience disappear. Victoria took a slow, deliberate step toward my chair. The faint, intoxicating scent of cedar and bergamot wrapped instantly around my senses. I instinctively crossed my trembling arms over my flat stomach. My heart hammered frantically against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Claire," she said softly. Her voice was unexpectedly smooth today, entirely lacking its usual sharp, mocking edge. She stopped moving mere inches from my knees. I had never been this close to her without a massive mahogany table dividing us. You know what happened, I whispered, hating how much my voice trembled. She gave a slow, incredibly controlled nod. They called me an hour ago, she replied evenly. Her intense gaze dropped briefly to my midsection before slowly meeting my eyes again. I squeezed my eyes shut, mentally preparing for the devastating blow. I will sign whatever non-disclosure agreements you want, I rushed out in a single breath. I know you do not want a public scandal tied to my name. I know you will probably demand that I terminate the pregnancy. A sudden, surprising warmth on my wrist instantly silenced my rising panic. I opened my eyes in state of sheer, unadulterated shock. Victoria Sterling was kneeling on the carpeted floor right in front of me. The untouchable billionaire of New York was entirely on her knees. Her long, elegant fingers were gently tracing the racing pulse point on my wrist. The gentle physical contact sent an electric jolt straight up my arm. Why would you ever assume I want to destroy this? She asked quietly. Her thumb lightly and rhythmically brushed against my sensitive skin. Because we absolutely hate each other, I breathed out. Victoria let out a low, incredibly breathless chuckle that sent a shiver down my spine. You hate me, Claire. She leaned in closer, boldly invading my personal space entirely. I have spent 10 long years just trying to get your undivided attention. My exhausted mind completely short-circuited at her confession. What exactly are you saying? I managed to ask through dry lips. Her striking blue eyes locked onto mine with a fierce, unwavering intensity. I am saying that I am 44 years old and completely tired of sleeping in an empty penthouse. I am saying that I froze those embryos because I desperately wanted a real family. She slowly moved her hand from my wrist to let it hover protectively just above my stomach. And I cannot think of a more perfect, brilliant woman to carry my child. The undeniable warmth radiating from her palm seeped directly through my thin silk blouse. My breath caught sharply in the back of my throat. Victoria, this situation is complete insanity, I whispered frantically. We are bitter rivals. We do not even know how to exist in the same room without arguing over blueprints. She tilted her head gracefully, a faint, devastatingly beautiful smile playing on her lips. Then we will simply have to learn. She did not pull her hand away from me. Her physical proximity was becoming incredibly, dangerously distracting. I am not asking you to do this difficult thing alone, Claire. I want to actively take care of you. I want to take care of our baby. The word "our" slipped from her lips with a natural intimacy that made my chest suddenly ache. I searched her striking features for any sign of a cruel, calculated joke. There was only raw, absolute sincerity in her expression. Move in with me, she stated, making the bold demand sound much more like a gentle plea. Let me give you absolutely everything you have ever wanted. My independent, fiercely guarded emotional walls instantly began to crack. I was looking directly at the woman who had stolen my clients and crushed my best proposals. Yet, in this terrifying moment, she looked exactly like my only safe sanctuary. She leaned forward slightly, her soft lips brushing incredibly close to my ear. Let's go home, Claire, she murmured softly. A heavy, heated shiver cascaded down my entire spine. I was utterly terrified, but for the first time in my life, I did not want to run away. I slowly uncrossed my arms and let my hand fall hesitantly onto her tailored shoulder. Victoria closed her eyes briefly at my voluntary touch. A soft, almost silent sigh of immense relief escaped her parted lips. It was the most beautiful, human sound I had ever heard her make. When she opened her eyes again, all her formidable defenses were completely gone. I realized my carefully planned life was not actually over. It was just beautifully beginning, irreversibly bound to the very woman I thought was my enemy. She gently laced her fingers through mine and helped me stand up from the chair. We walked out of that sterile clinic holding hands, completely ready to face whatever came next. The sleek black town car glided smoothly through the rain-slick streets of Manhattan. I sat rigidly against the plush leather seat, staring blindly out the tinted window. My entire existence was currently packed into 3 modest suitcases resting in the trunk. It had taken less than 2 hours for my reality to completely invert itself. Beside me sat the very architect of my daily professional nightmares. Victoria Sterling was casually reading an email on her phone as if nothing extraordinary had happened. She looked entirely at ease, exuding that effortless corporate dominance I usually despised. Yet, every time the car took a sharp turn, her free hand hovered instinctively near my waist. She was constantly making sure I did not lose my balance on the leather seats. The subtle, highly protective gesture sent confusing shockwaves directly to my brain. "Are you feeling nauseous?" she suddenly asked, locking her phone screen. Her striking pale eyes scanned my pale face with an intensity that made me swallow hard. "I am just overwhelmed," I admitted softly, refusing to look away from the passing city lights. "I still cannot believe I actually agreed to get into this vehicle with you." Victoria shifted her posture, turning her lean body fully toward my side of the car. "You made the most logical choice for your health and for our child," she replied evenly. I let out a breathless, disbelieving laugh at her clinical choice of words. Logical is not the word I would use to describe moving in with my sworn enemy. She reached out, her cool fingertips lightly brushing a stray curl away from my cheek. The fleeting contact burned a trail of invisible fire across my sensitive skin. "Perhaps we can finally drop the enemy narrative behind closed doors," she murmured. The town car smoothly pulled into the private underground garage of a glittering high-rise. Before the driver could even unbuckle his seatbelt, Victoria was already opening her door. She walked around the vehicle and opened my door, extending a perfectly manicured hand. I hesitated for a fraction of a second before placing my palm against hers. Her grip was remarkably firm, grounding my spiraling anxiety almost instantly. We rode the private glass elevator up to the penthouse in a thick, charged silence. I mentally prepared myself for a cold, sterile apartment that matched her ruthless public persona. The elevator doors chimed and slid open to reveal something entirely unexpected. The massive living space was bathed in the warm, golden glow of ambient floor lamps. Plush cashmere throws were draped invitingly over expansive, cream-colored linen sofas. A massive custom fireplace crackled softly, radiating a deeply comforting heat. "You expected stainless steel and black leather, didn't you?" Victoria observed with a knowing smirk. I stepped onto the thick Persian rug, feeling completely exposed in her private sanctuary. "I expected a villain's lair, yes," I countered, wrapping my arms defensively around myself. Victoria chuckled, a rich, dark sound that vibrated pleasantly in the quiet room. She stepped out of her tailored suit jacket and tossed it carelessly over a nearby chair. Without the structured blazer, she looked disarmingly soft in her tailored white dress shirt. She casually rolled up her sleeves, exposing strong, elegant forearms. "I had my assistant restock the entire kitchen with prenatal-approved groceries," she announced. She walked over to the sprawling marble kitchen island and poured a glass of room-temperature water. She walked back and gently pressed the sleek glass into my trembling hands. "Drink this, Claire." I took a small sip, acutely aware of how closely she was monitoring my every move. "You did not have to do all of this in 2 hours, I whispered defensively. "I am pregnant, Victoria, not completely incapacitated." She stepped dangerously close again, her towering frame casting a protective shadow over me. "I know exactly how capable you are," she said, her voice dropping a very deliberate octave. "I have watched you ruthlessly dismantle my bidding strategies for a solid decade." She reached out and slowly traced the rim of the water glass I was holding. "But you are carrying a piece of me now. Her striking gaze flicked down to my stomach, softening in a way that made my breath hitch. You no longer have to fight for your survival, Claire. I will fight every single battle for the both of you from now on. My heart hammered fiercely against my ribs at her bold, uncompromising declaration. This was the exact same relentless drive she used to conquer the architectural world. Now, that terrifying, singular focus was entirely directed at protecting me. I set the water glass down on the nearest table, my hands shaking too much to hold it safely. Where am I sleeping? I asked, desperately needing a physical boundary between us. Victoria held my gaze for a long, agonizing moment, letting the heavy tension stretch. The master bedroom is down the hall to the right, she finally instructed softly. Where will you be sleeping? I challenged, my competitive instincts flaring up. A slow, predatory smile curved the edges of her beautiful mouth. In the master bedroom, she replied without a single ounce of hesitation. It is a custom king-sized bed, Claire. I am not letting you out of my sight tonight. Panic and a strange, terrifying thrill warred violently in my chest. We are not sharing a bed, I stated firmly, though my voice lacked its usual conviction. Victoria stepped closer, completely eliminating the remaining distance between our bodies. The intoxicating scent of cedar and bergamot engulfed my senses entirely. We are sharing a child, she whispered, her warm breath fanning across my jawline. Sharing a mattress seems like a rather trivial line to draw at this point. She did not touch me, but her proximity was more consuming than a physical embrace. I swallowed hard, finding myself completely unable to formulate a rational argument. She stepped back, finally offering me the space I desperately needed to breathe. Take a hot shower, Claire. I will bring your bags to the room. I nodded numbly, turning away before she could see the flushed color spreading across my cheeks. As I walked down the long, warmly lit hallway, my mind spun utterly out of control. I had walked into this apartment expecting a fierce battle of wills with my greatest enemy. Instead, I was terrified that I might actually surrender to the comforting warmth of her fire. I closed the heavy bedroom door behind me, knowing my old life was officially gone forever. The hot water cascading down my tired shoulders did very little to wash away the surreal nature of my current reality. I stood shivering slightly in the expansive, marble-clad bathroom, staring blankly at my own reflection in the fogged mirror. My 42-year-old face showed the undeniable, heavy signs of profound emotional exhaustion. Yet, lingering just beneath the fatigue, there was a faint, completely unfamiliar flush of anticipation warming my cheeks. I slowly slipped into my modest cotton pajamas, feeling entirely out of place inside a billionaire's custom penthouse. The soft metallic click of the bathroom door unlocking sounded as deafening as a gunshot in the quiet apartment. I stepped hesitantly onto the plush, imported carpet of the sprawling master bedroom. The massive room was bathed entirely in the dim, silver moonlight filtering softly through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Victoria was already waiting in bed, propped up gracefully against a mountain of crisp, white linen pillows. She was wearing a sharply tailored, navy blue silk nightshirt that draped flawlessly over her commanding frame. The deliberately unbuttoned collar exposed the sharp, elegant lines of her collarbone and neck. Even in a state of rest, her beautifully lean, athletic physique projected a quiet, undeniable aura of strength. She carefully took off her reading glasses and placed them softly on the mahogany nightstand the very moment I walked into the room. Those piercing, icy Nordic blue eyes locked immediately onto my frozen figure with absolute, unwavering precision. There was absolutely no trace of our usual boardroom hostility left in her striking gaze tonight. Instead, I found myself paralyzed, staring deeply into an uncharted ocean of quiet, fierce devotion. I stood awkwardly at the foot of the massive, custom king-sized bed, clutching my arms defensively around my chest. You look exactly like you are preparing to walk directly into a hostile ambush, Claire, she noted softly, breaking the heavy silence. Her low, remarkably husky voice sent a direct, involuntary shiver racing straight down my spine. I have spent an entire decade treating you as my single greatest professional threat, I reminded her defensively, my voice trembling slightly. I slowly walked around to the empty side of the mattress and pulled back the heavy, down-filled duvet. Old, deeply ingrained survival habits are incredibly difficult to break in a matter of hours. Victoria shifted her weight gracefully, making deliberate space for me under the luxurious covers. I am no longer your competition, and this is no longer a battlefield. I slid cautiously into the bed, keeping my tense body rigidly positioned near the extreme outer edge of the mattress. The bed was impossibly soft and inviting, yet I remained as stiff and unyielding as a wooden board. Victoria reached over with an elegant arm and completely switched off the glowing bedside lamp. The sudden, enveloping darkness of the room instantly amplified the ragged, uneven sound of my breathing. The intoxicating, expensive scent of her signature cedar and bergamot engulfed my senses completely. It was a distinct fragrance I used to heavily associate with lost corporate contracts and fierce, bitter arguments over blueprints. Now, in the quiet dark, it simply smelled like undeniable warmth and a terrifying, seductive safety. We lay there in total, suffocating silence for what felt like an absolute eternity. My overworked mind raced frantically with 1,000 unsaid questions and deeply rooted, lingering doubts. Suddenly, my lower back cramped violently, a new and deeply uncomfortable symptom of my early pregnancy. I let out a quiet, sharply muffled gasp, instinctively shifting my weight in an attempt to alleviate the dull ache. Before I could even attempt to settle again, the mattress shifted noticeably behind my back. The intense, radiating heat of Victoria's tall, strong body pressed gently but firmly against my spine. She did not ask for polite permission, nor did she hesitate for a single fraction of a second. A long, elegantly sculpted arm slipped smoothly and confidently around my waist. Her warm palm came to rest with absolute, breathtaking reverence flat against my lower stomach. My breath hitched violently in the quiet, shadowed dark of the bedroom. Victoria, I whispered frantically, the single name tumbling out of my mouth as half warning, half desperate plea. You are cramping again, she murmured softly, her face pressed intimately into the loose hair at the sensitive nape of my neck. Her large, remarkably warm hand began to rub incredibly soothing, rhythmic circles over my lower abdomen. The stubborn tension locked firmly inside my muscles began to melt away almost instantly under her expert touch. I read extensively this evening that a gentle, localized massage and consistent body heat can significantly alleviate early trimester discomfort. I closed my eyes tightly, completely overwhelmed by the fierce, highly protective tenderness vibrating in her hushed tone. She was a famously untouchable titan of the real estate industry, a woman known for meticulously calculating every ruthless move. Yet here she was, quietly researching mundane pregnancy remedies in the middle of the night just to ease my physical pain. You truly do not have to hold me like this, I breathed out shakily, my voice betraying a distinct, humiliating lack of conviction. I want to hold you exactly like this for the rest of my life, she countered seamlessly, her tone leaving absolutely no room for argument. She boldly pulled me just a fraction closer, aligning our mature, world-weary bodies together in a perfectly natural fit. You carry our entire future right in there, Claire. Protecting both of you from the rest of the world is my only remaining priority now. Her steady, powerful heartbeat thumped a rhythmic, incredibly comforting cadence directly against my spine. The very last remaining brick in my carefully constructed emotional defensive wall finally crumbled into dust. I stopped fighting the intense magnetic pull between us and leaned my full, exhausted weight completely back into her secure embrace. Victoria let out a soft, immensely satisfied sigh, tightening her protective hold just enough to make me feel entirely anchored to the earth. For 10 long, bitter years, I had fought tooth and nail against this extraordinary, formidable woman. Tonight, wrapped safely and completely in the strong arms of my sworn enemy, I found the only true home I ever actually wanted. The heavy exhaustion of the day finally claimed my restless mind. I drifted into the deepest sleep of my adult life, guided solely by the gentle, rhythmic stroke of her thumb across my warm skin. The sharp, unforgiving morning sunlight sliced cleanly through the subtle gap in the heavy blackout curtains. I slowly drifted back into consciousness, acutely aware of a comforting, solid weight draped across my waist. My cheek was resting softly against the smooth, impossibly warm expanse of a bare shoulder. It took my completely sleep-addled brain several long seconds to fully process my immediate physical surroundings. I was still securely anchored right in the middle of Victoria Sterling's sprawling custom bed. More surprisingly, I had actually slept through the entire night without a single moment of paralyzing anxiety. I carefully tilted my head back to look at the formidable woman sleeping soundly beside me. In the quiet morning light, her usually sharp, intimidating Nordic features appeared remarkably soft and serene. Her icy blonde hair was beautifully tousled, spilling like liquid silver across the pristine white linen pillowcases. She looked incredibly relaxed and vulnerable, entirely stripped of her untouchable corporate armor. A sudden, unexpected surge of pure, unadulterated affection tightly squeezed my chest. I instinctively held my breath, terrified that the slightest movement might shatter this fragile, impossible peace. Suddenly, the harsh, jarring marimba ringtone of my cell phone shattered the quiet intimacy of the bedroom. The intrusive sound echoed violently off the high, vaulted penthouse ceilings. I scrambled frantically across the massive mattress to snatch the device from my designer purse on the floor. Victoria stirred instantly behind me, her long limbs shifting with innate, athletic grace. I glanced down at the glowing screen and saw my lead project manager's name flashing urgently. "Sarah, it is barely 7 in the morning," I answered, trying desperately to keep my voice low and steady. "Claire, we have a massive problem with the Hudson River development contract," Sarah blurted out in sheer panic. "Marcus Vance just called my personal line demanding an immediate renegotiation of our design fees." My stomach violently dropped, instantly triggering a sharp, sickening wave of early morning nausea. Marcus Vance was notoriously the most difficult, cutthroat real estate developer on the entire East Coast. What possible leverage does he think he has at this delicate stage of the project? I demanded sharply. "He heard a rumor from the clinic that you are taking an abrupt medical leave of absence," Sarah explained breathlessly. "He is explicitly threatening to pull the entire contract and hand it directly over to Sterling Architecture." My blood ran entirely cold at the sudden, threatening mention of Victoria's wildly successful firm. This was the exact, ruthless corporate strategy Victoria and I had used against each other for a solid decade. We notoriously poached each other's panicked clients at the very first sign of institutional weakness. I felt the mattress shift significantly as Victoria gracefully sat upright behind me. She effortlessly reached around my waist and smoothly plucked the vibrating cell phone right out of my trembling hand. "Victoria, do not," I started to protest, my old defensive instincts flaring up instantly. She completely ignored my weak objection and pressed the smartphone directly to her own ear. "Sarah, this is Victoria Sterling," she announced, her voice instantly dropping into its legendary, freezing boardroom cadence. I watched in absolute, stunned silence as her entire demeanor shifted from gentle protector to absolute apex predator. "You will inform Mr. Vance that Sterling Architecture has absolutely zero interest in his derivative, uninspired project." She did not raise her voice, but the sheer, undeniable authority in her tone was absolutely terrifying. Furthermore, you will explicitly tell him that if he attempts to strong-arm Claire's firm again, I will personally ensure he never secures another zoning permit in Manhattan. She casually tossed my expensive phone onto the soft duvet cover without waiting for Sarah's shocked reply. I sat completely frozen, my mouth slightly parted in utter, paralyzed disbelief. You just deliberately sabotaged a $50 million contract for your own firm, I whispered hoarsely. Victoria sighed softly, running her elegant fingers slowly through her disheveled blonde hair. She reached out and gently pulled my rigid body back against her warm, steady chest. I told you last night that I am no longer your competition, Claire. She pressed a lingering, incredibly tender kiss directly against the sensitive skin of my temple. My firm does not need Marcus Vance's dirty money to survive. I simply need you to stop worrying about anything other than your own health and our child. Her strong arms wrapped securely around my waist once again, pulling me entirely against her frame. I meant exactly what I said about fighting absolutely all of your battles from now on. I leaned heavily against her, finally realizing the absolute magnitude of her unwavering devotion. The undisputed, untouchable queen of the New York real estate world was systematically dismantling her own empire just to keep me safe. It was the most terrifyingly romantic thing anyone had ever done for me in my entire 42 years of life. I turned my head slightly, allowing my lips to brush softly against the strong curve of her jaw. Victoria let out a low, breathless sound at the voluntary, intimate contact. She immediately tightened her grip on me, her icy blue eyes burning with an intense, possessive fire. You belong with me now, she whispered fiercely, sealing her bold promise against my hair. The last remnants of our 10-year rivalry evaporated completely in the warmth of the morning sun. The crisp, autumnal air of Manhattan felt surprisingly refreshing as we stepped out of the Blacktown car. Victoria had completely cleared her famously impenetrable schedule for this specific Tuesday morning. She had forcefully rescheduled 3 separate international board meetings just to accompany me to the obstetrician. I adjusted the collar of my cashmere coat, feeling a familiar flutter of nervous anticipation in my stomach. We were walking into the highly exclusive, private medical suite of the city's most renowned maternal specialist. Victoria placed a steady, reassuring hand on the small of my back as we approached the heavy glass doors. Her physical touch had evolved over the past few weeks from hesitant experimentation to a confident, constant presence. The clinic staff greeted us with a level of hushed, terrifying reverence usually reserved for visiting royalty. Victoria had essentially rented out the entire diagnostic floor to ensure absolute privacy for our appointment. I sat nervously on the edge of the examination table, my legs dangling over the sterile paper covering. The sleek, high-tech ultrasound machine hummed quietly in the corner of the softly lit room. Dr. Evans, a kind-faced woman with decades of experience, entered the room with a warm, professional smile. "Are we ready to finally meet the little one today?" Dr. Evans asked, adjusting the glowing monitors. I nodded silently, my throat suddenly entirely too dry to formulate a proper verbal response. Victoria immediately stepped closer to the examination table, her tall, athletic frame casting a comforting shadow over me. She reached out and smoothly intertwined her long, elegant fingers directly with my trembling ones. Her icy blonde hair was pulled back into a severe, flawless chignon, yet her features were remarkably soft. The doctor gently applied the cold, clear conducting gel to my slightly rounded lower abdomen. I let out a sharp, involuntary gasp at the sudden drop in temperature against my sensitive skin. Victoria's grip instantly tightened around my hand, her thumb stroking my knuckles in a highly soothing rhythm. The sonogram wand began to glide slowly and deliberately across my stomach. The glowing digital screen flickered to life, displaying a chaotic storm of black, white, and gray static. I stared intensely at the monitor, my breath hitching painfully in the back of my throat. For a brief, terrifying moment, I could not identify anything that remotely resembled a human life. Then, Dr. Evans subtly adjusted the angle of the sophisticated medical instrument. A tiny, rhythmic pulsing motion suddenly appeared right in the dead center of the screen. "There it is," Dr. Evans whispered warmly, tapping the glass directly over the flickering gray shape. She pushed a small silver button on the console, instantly filling the quiet room with a profound sound. A rapid, incredibly powerful whoosh 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 echoed loudly from the medical speakers. It was the remarkably strong, undeniably rapid heartbeat of the tiny life growing inside of me. My vision blurred instantly as hot, uninvited tears welled up fiercely in my eyes. I had spent 42 years building skyscrapers and managing multi-million-dollar structural projects. Yet, absolutely nothing I had ever created could even begin to compare to this extraordinary, rhythmic sound. A single tear slipped freely down my cheek, tracing a wet path directly to my jawline. I slowly turned my head to look at the woman standing steadfastly beside me. Victoria was staring completely transfixed at the glowing monitor, her usual stoic mask completely shattered. Those piercing, Nordic blue eyes were swimming with an intense, overwhelming moisture she could not completely hide. Her sharp jawline trembled slightly, betraying a depth of raw emotion I had never witnessed in our 10 years of bitter rivalry. She slowly brought our joined hands up to her lips and pressed a desperate, lingering kiss against my knuckles. "Our baby," Victoria breathed out into the quiet space, the two fragile words cracking slightly under the weight of her awe. I squeezed her hand back with every ounce of strength I possessed in my exhausted body. "Our baby," I echoed softly, the absolute reality of those words finally sinking deep into my bones. The undeniable magic of that tiny, rapid heartbeat systematically dismantled the very last of my emotional defenses. I realized in that incredibly fragile moment that I was no longer fighting this unexpected twist of fate. I was deeply, terrifyingly in love with the formidable woman holding my hand. The heavy realization hit me not with a violent crash, but with a quiet, absolute certainty. Victoria looked down at me, her gaze completely bare and burning with quiet, unconditional adoration. She carefully leaned down and pressed a remarkably tender kiss to the damp skin of my cheek. The distinct, deeply comforting scent of cedar and bergamot surrounded me like an impenetrable shield. Dr. Evans discreetly printed out a long strip of ultrasound photos, stepping back to allow us our private moment. Victoria took the black and white images with a reverence usually reserved for priceless architectural blueprints. She studied the blurry silhouette with an intensity that made my chest ache with pure, unadulterated joy. "I am going to build a massive empire for this child, Claire," she whispered fiercely, tracing the printed image. "We are going to build it together," I corrected her gently, my voice steady and completely sure. Victoria looked up from the photograph, a devastatingly beautiful smile breaking across her elegant features. It was a genuine, radiant smile that completely transformed her usually intimidating face into pure light. She carefully wiped a stray tear from my cheek with the soft pad of her thumb. "Yes, my love," she murmured softly, using the intimate term of endearment with breathtaking naturalness. "We are going to build this family exactly how we want it." We walked out of the clinic that morning irrevocably bonded by the tiny, invisible life tethering our souls together. The transition into my second trimester brought an undeniable, physical reality to our intimately guarded world. My once sharply tailored corporate suits had officially been replaced by softer, significantly more forgiving silhouettes. Tonight was the annual Manhattan Real Estate Excellence Gala, the most ruthless and highly anticipated social event of the year. For a solid decade, Victoria and I had attended this exact banquet strictly as bitter, warring titans of the industry. We would traditionally sit at completely opposite ends of the sprawling ballroom, glaring at each other over crystal champagne flutes. This year, however, I was walking through those glittering gilded doors holding the absolute apex predator's hand. Victoria had meticulously commissioned a breathtaking, custom emerald green silk gown specifically designed for my changing body. The luxurious fabric draped flawlessly over my softly rounding stomach, making me feel undeniably radiant rather than visibly vulnerable. She wore a stark, impeccably tailored black velvet tuxedo that contrasted magnificently with my vibrant, dual-toned dress. Her icy blonde hair was styled in sleek, structural waves that perfectly framed her sharp, arresting Nordic features. The very moment we stepped onto the flashbulb-lit red carpet, a sudden, heavy hush fell over the gathered press. The notoriously untouchable, icy CEO of Sterling Architecture was openly intertwining her fingers with her greatest historical rival. I instinctively tightened my grip on her warm hand as the aggressive barrage of camera shutters finally erupted around us. Victoria did not flinch, simply pulling me a fraction closer to her athletic side with a deeply reassuring squeeze. We gracefully navigated the opulent, crowded ballroom under the intense, scorching weight of 1,000 whispered rumors. Every major developer and influential broker in New York City was watching our every single, coordinated movement. I was momentarily separated from Victoria when the influential city mayor cornered her to urgently discuss a massive civic project. I retreated to a relatively quiet corner near the towering Champagne Pyramid, grateful for a brief moment to catch my breath. The persistent, dull ache in my lower back flared up slightly, a constant, beautiful reminder of the precious life growing inside me. My moment of fragile peace was abruptly shattered by the highly unwelcome arrival of Richard Hayes. Richard was a particularly slimy corporate developer who had lost 3 major waterfront bids to my firm last year. He harbored a deeply bitter, entirely unprofessional grudge against my continued independence and success. He looked me up and down, his gaze lingering disrespectfully on the subtle, undeniable curve of my waistline. Taking an extended, quiet sabbatical, Claire, he drawled loudly, explicitly ensuring the surrounding circle of elites could hear him. The entire executive board has been wondering if you finally lost your famous, razor-sharp edge. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his amber bourbon, his eyes gleaming with sheer, undisguised malice. Or perhaps those vicious rumors about an unplanned, highly inconvenient health issue are actually true. My heart began to hammer erratically against my ribs as the surrounding industry leaders turned to actively watch the spectacle. Before I could even formulate a suitably cutting, fiercely professional response, the ambient temperature in the room seemingly plummeted. A tall, incredibly commanding shadow fell directly over Richard's smug, entirely punchable face. Victoria stepped seamlessly in front of me, completely blocking me from his predatory, deeply invasive line of sight. She radiated an aura of pure, absolute menace that instantly silenced the murmuring crowd of gathered executives. Richard, you have always possessed a remarkably tragic inability to comprehend when you are entirely outmatched, Victoria stated coldly. Her usually low, husky voice resonated with a terrifying, razor-sharp clarity across the suddenly hushed ballroom. Richard visibly swallowed hard, taking a desperate, involuntary step back from the terrifying, blonde titan. I was merely inquiring about her firm's sudden, highly apparent vulnerability, he stammered, his previous arrogance entirely evaporating. Victoria reached back without ever looking away from him, her warm fingers finding and securely anchoring around my waist. Claire's firm is fully backed by the entire, undisputed financial weight of the Sterling Empire, she announced flawlessly. The collective, sharp intake of breath from the surrounding elite crowd of developers was incredibly audible. She shifted her powerful stance, turning slightly so that her protective embrace around my changing body was completely visible. Furthermore, Claire is absolutely not experiencing an inconvenient health issue, as your deeply pathetic sources have claimed. Victoria looked incredibly regal in that defining moment, an absolute queen ruthlessly defending her chosen family in front of the entire court. She is my life partner, and she is currently carrying our beloved child. The utter silence that aggressively followed her bold, uncompromising declaration was absolute and incredibly profound. She had just willingly detonated the absolute biggest social and corporate scandal of the decade without a single ounce of hesitation. Richard's jaw practically hit the polished marble floor, his sweating face draining of all natural color. Now, if you ever speak to my family with that disrespectful tone again, I will personally and legally obliterate your entire bloodline. She did not raise her voice at all, but the terrifying promise hung heavily in the air like an absolute, inescapable execution order. Richard practically fled the corner of the ballroom, vanishing into the shocked crowd like a terrified, thoroughly beaten dog. Victoria finally turned her piercing, icy blue eyes away from the retreating coward and looked directly down at me. The terrifying, ruthless apex predator completely vanished, replaced instantly by the deeply devoted woman I had grown to fiercely love. She gently brushed a stray, dark curl away from my cheek, entirely ignoring the hundreds of stunned eyes actively watching us. "Are you completely all right, my love?" she murmured softly, her thumb tracing a highly comforting circle against my hip. I looked up into those striking Nordic eyes, feeling an overwhelming, tidal wave of pure, undeniable security wash over my soul. 10 years ago, I would have deeply resented anyone speaking for me in a professional, highly public setting. Tonight, watching this extraordinary woman willingly burn down her entire public persona just to keep me completely safe, I only felt profound peace. "I am absolutely perfect," I whispered back, leaning my entire weight confidently into her strong, undeniably protective embrace. She smiled, a devastatingly beautiful expression that entirely illuminated her usually stoic, flawless face. Victoria leaned down and pressed a soft, deeply lingering kiss directly to my forehead, officially sealing her absolute devotion for the entire world to witness. We spent the rest of the dramatic evening exactly like that, wrapped safely and completely inside our own impenetrable, deeply loving universe. The heavy, undeniable reality of the third trimester finally settled over the penthouse like a thick, expectant fog. My previously manageable center of gravity had completely vanished, replaced by an exhausting, constant pressure in my lower back. Simple, mundane tasks like tying my own shoes or retrieving a dropped pen had become entirely impossible physical feats. Fortunately, the formidable CEO of Sterling Architecture had completely suspended all her international travel for the foreseeable future. Victoria had systematically transformed our sleek, adult sanctuary into a highly secure, obsessively padded fortress. Every single sharp marble edge and custom mahogany corner in the apartment was now discreetly encased in specialized silicone guards. She had personally fired 2 different elite interior designers because their proposed nursery layouts lacked sufficient structural safety. Instead, the untouchable real estate titan had spent the entire weekend actively assembling imported baby furniture herself. It was exactly 2 in the morning on a Tuesday when a loud, deeply frustrated sigh echoed sharply from down the darkened hallway. I slowly pushed myself up from the massive master bed, wincing slightly as our child executed a powerful internal somersault. I waddled cautiously toward the soft, warm glow spilling generously out of the newly painted nursery doorway. The sight that greeted me instantly melted away any lingering, exhausted irritation I felt about being awake. Victoria was sitting cross-legged in the dead center of the plush, cream-colored nursery rug. She was wearing her expensive silk pajamas, though her usually immaculate blonde hair was in an uncharacteristic, chaotic state. She was currently glaring fiercely at a wooden mechanical mobile as if it were a stubbornly hostile corporate takeover target. Scattered all around her athletic frame were heavily highlighted medical journals and advanced obstetric textbooks. "This Swedish engineering is fundamentally flawed and structurally unsound," she muttered darkly, not even looking up at me. I leaned heavily against the wooden doorframe, allowing a soft, deeply affectionate laugh to escape my lips. "I seriously doubt the manufacturer anticipated an architectural genius trying to aggressively reinvent their baby mobile," I teased gently. Victoria finally dropped the small wooden piece, running her elegant hands over her face in a gesture of absolute exhaustion. I slowly maneuvered my heavy body onto the carpet, sinking down carefully right next to her rigid form. She instantly abandoned the wooden toy and wrapped a strong, highly protective arm securely around my waist. "You should definitely be sleeping, Claire," she reprimanded softly, pressing a deeply apologetic kiss against my temple. I woke up and realized my fiercely protective guard dog was missing from her post. I replied smoothly, resting my heavy head against her shoulder. Victoria let out a heavy, incredibly shaky breath that betrayed the absolute panic carefully hidden beneath her stoic exterior. I shifted my position slightly, looking directly into those striking, usually impenetrable Nordic blue eyes. They were currently swimming with a raw, undeniable terror that I had never witnessed in all our years of rivalry. "I am running out of time to prepare," she confessed in a rough, uncharacteristically vulnerable whisper. "I have successfully optimized 3 alternate routes to the hospital to account for unpredictable Manhattan traffic variables. I have memoized the statistical probabilities of every potential late-stage labor complication listed in these journals. Yet, I still feel entirely, terrifyingly unqualified to keep the two of you completely safe." The absolute magnitude of her profound anxiety squeezed my heart tightly with an overwhelming, consuming wave of pure love. This brilliant, ruthless woman who routinely decimated entire corporate empires was entirely paralyzed by the prospect of becoming a mother. I reached out and gently cupped her beautifully sharp jawline, forcing her to maintain direct, steady eye contact with me. "Victoria, you cannot manage this birth exactly like a massive real estate portfolio," I murmured softly, brushing my thumb across her cheek. "You absolutely cannot calculate and eliminate every single biological variable in a spreadsheet." "But I desperately need to possess absolute control over the outcome," she insisted, her voice cracking slightly at the very end. Before I could even formulate a comforting response, a sharp, incredibly distinct kick radiated violently across my stomach. The baby had apparently decided to actively participate in this late-night emotional summit. Victoria gasped softly as she visibly saw my silk nightgown ripple from the powerful, sudden internal movement. Without a single moment of hesitation, she slid her large, remarkably warm hand completely flat against the taut skin of my belly. Another swift, undeniable kick landed directly against the center of her sensitive palm. The profound, frantic tension locked tightly within Victoria's broad shoulders instantly evaporated into the quiet room. She stared down at my stomach with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe that completely transformed her striking face. "She is already incredibly strong," Victoria whispered reverently, a single, happy tear finally escaping her icy blue eyes. "She definitely takes after her fiercely uncompromising mother," I reminded her softly, covering her trembling hand securely with my own. Victoria looked back up at me, the terrifying shadow of her clinical anxiety finally replaced by a steady, brilliant resolve. "I do not need you to be a flawless medical expert, Victoria. I just need you to stand right beside me and hold my hand when the time finally comes." She carefully leaned down and pressed a long, deeply devoted kiss directly over the exact spot where our daughter had just kicked. "I am never letting go of your hand, Claire," she vowed fiercely into the soft silk fabric of my gown. "I will be exactly right there, fighting for every single breath you take." We sat quietly together on the nursery floor until the morning sun finally broke across the city skyline, perfectly ready for whatever storm was destined to come. The inevitable moment finally arrived at 3 in the morning during a torrential Manhattan downpour. I was abruptly awakened by a sharp, paralyzing contraction that completely stole the breath from my lungs. A warm rush of fluid soaked the custom silk sheets, signaling that our daughter was entirely ready to meet the world. "Victoria," I gasped out, my voice tight and trembling with sudden, overwhelming pain. She was instantly awake and out of bed before my frantic plea even fully echoed in the dark room. The anxious, vulnerable woman from the nursery was completely gone, instantly replaced by the ruthless, highly efficient CEO. "I have you, Claire," she stated with absolute, unwavering certainty, her voice a steady anchor in my rising panic. Within 3 minutes, she had me carefully bundled in a heavy coat and seated securely in the waiting town car. The chaotic, rain-slick journey to the private maternity hospital felt like an agonizing, entirely endless blur. By the time we reached the sterile, brightly lit delivery suite, the contractions were crashing over me like violent, unforgiving waves. I gripped the metal bed rails with white-knuckled intensity, completely unable to suppress a loud, ragged cry of agony. Victoria practically shoved the attending nurses aside to take her rightful place directly beside my pillow. She seized my trembling hand with a fiercely protective grip, her icy blue eyes locked entirely onto my tear-stained face. "Look directly at me, my love," she commanded softly, her usually flawless hair now clinging wildly to her damp forehead. "Just focus completely on my voice and breathe exactly when I tell you to." Hours bled relentlessly into one another, completely destroying any lingering concept of time or dignity I had left. The physical pain was utterly excruciating, completely stripping away the last remnants of my independent, stubborn pride. Every single time I felt like I was drowning in the agony, Victoria was right there to aggressively pull me back to the surface. She wiped the cold sweat from my brow with a surprisingly tender, trembling hand. "I cannot do this anymore," I sobbed weakly, violently burying my face against her strong, tailored shoulder. The untouchable titan of New York real estate looked up at the medical team, her expression twisted in raw, unadulterated desperation. "Give her whatever she needs to stop this pain immediately," Victoria growled at the chief obstetrician, completely abandoning all professional decorum. "I will gladly buy this entire hospital tomorrow, but you need to help her right now." Her fierce, completely unhinged devotion broke through the heavy fog of my suffering, coaxing a breathless, exhausted laugh from my chest. "I just need you," I whispered frantically, gripping her expensive shirt collar like a desperate lifeline. "I am never leaving this exact spot," she promised fiercely, pressing her wet, tear-stained cheek directly against mine. The final, agonizing push required absolutely every single ounce of strength I had left in my exhausted body. Victoria practically held my entire upper body weight, her strong arms providing the only solid foundation in my crumbling world. A sudden, sharp cry instantly shattered the heavy, tense silence of the delivery room. The beautiful, miraculous sound completely stopped time, instantly erasing all the preceding hours of agonizing pain. "She is here, Claire," Victoria choked out, her usually commanding voice completely breaking into a messy, beautiful sob. The doctor gently placed a warm, wriggling weight directly onto my bare chest. I looked down through a thick veil of exhausted tears at the tiny, perfect life we had somehow created together. She had a small tuft of striking, icy blonde hair that undeniably mirrored the extraordinary woman leaning over us. Victoria pressed a desperate, completely overwhelming kiss directly to my forehead, her hot tears falling freely onto my skin. "Thank you," she whispered against my hair, her entire imposing frame trembling with a profound, earth-shattering relief. I looked up at my former enemy, entirely surrounded by the blinding, beautiful reality of our new family. The agonizing journey was finally over, and our perfect, beautifully chaotic life was officially beginning. The luxury penthouse was exceptionally quiet on this crisp, beautiful Sunday morning. It had been exactly 2 months since our daughter, Eleanor, unexpectedly rearranged our entire universe. I quietly stepped out of the master bedroom, holding a steaming mug of black coffee. My postpartum body was slowly but steadily healing, heavily supported by Victoria's constant, completely overbearing care. I wandered down the sunlit hallway toward Victoria's private, mahogany-paneled home office. I was simply looking for a misplaced architectural blueprint to review for my upcoming return to work. Victoria had surprisingly left her massive desk slightly disorganized, an incredibly rare occurrence for the meticulous CEO. A heavily redacted, incredibly thick legal folder caught my immediate attention near the edge of the leather blotter. The officially embossed logo on the thick cover belonged entirely to the highly exclusive private IVF clinic I had used. A strange, inexplicably cold knot of curiosity instantly formed in the pit of my stomach. I set my hot coffee down and slowly opened the highly confidential, strictly classified document. It was a finalized, multi-million-dollar corporate acquisition contract signed forcefully by Victoria Sterling. My eyes scanned the heavy black text, zeroing in on the officially stamped and legally notarized execution date. The medical clinic had been secretly, entirely purchased by Sterling Architecture exactly 3 months before my supposedly accidental procedure. My breath hitched sharply in the quiet, completely empty expanse of the luxurious office. The catastrophic, life-altering clerical error that had irrevocably bound us together was never an accident at all. It was a meticulously calculated, ruthlessly executed corporate acquisition of my entire future. I picked up the heavy folder, my hands trembling slightly with a terrifying mixture of sheer shock and profound awe. I walked slowly back down the hallway, navigating toward the soft, happy sounds coming from the sunlit living room. Victoria was sitting gracefully on the plush cream sofa, bathed entirely in warm, golden morning light. She was gently rocking Eleanor against her chest, feeding our tiny daughter with absolute, practiced devotion. The ruthless apex predator of Manhattan real estate was currently humming a soft, incredibly off-key Swedish lullaby. She looked up as I approached, her striking Nordic blue eyes softening instantly at the sight of me. "You should still be resting, my love," Victoria murmured softly, her attention divided equally between me and the sleeping infant. I silently dropped the heavy clinic acquisition folder directly onto the glass coffee table right in front of her. The thick stack of undeniable legal evidence landed with a loud, highly definitive thud in the quiet room. Victoria briefly glanced down at the visible clinic logo, her flawless, aristocratic expression not changing in the slightest. She did not look visibly guilty, nor did she attempt to formulate a desperate, immediate excuse for her actions. She simply adjusted Eleanor's soft cashmere blanket, ensuring the precious baby was perfectly warm and secure. "You fundamentally do not believe in coincidence at all, do you?" I asked quietly, my voice utterly devoid of any real anger. Victoria finally met my gaze, her eyes burning with that familiar, intense, completely unapologetic possessiveness. "I am a highly successful businesswoman, Claire," she stated simply, her voice low and remarkably smooth. "I have spent my entire adult life learning that if you want something to be absolutely perfect, you simply build it yourself." She reached out with her free hand, her long, elegant fingers gently and securely catching my wrist. "I watched you confidently walk into that clinic, actively preparing to build a family with a completely anonymous stranger. I simply could not allow another person to legally claim the most brilliant, extraordinary woman I had ever known." Her thumb slowly stroked the racing pulse point on my wrist, re-establishing that deeply comforting, highly familiar rhythm. So, I essentially bought the entire medical firm, completely bypassed the donor registry, and effectively rewrote the blueprints of your life. Any rational, fully sane woman would have run screaming from the penthouse immediately after hearing such a terrifying confession. Yet, as I looked at the incredible, beautifully secure life she had ruthlessly carved out for us, I only felt profound peace. She had willingly orchestrated the ultimate, entirely illegal corporate takeover just to ensure I was completely, unequivocally loved. "You are an absolute, uncompromising megalomaniac," I whispered softly, stepping completely into her intimate personal space. Victoria smiled, a devastatingly beautiful expression that entirely illuminated the previously quiet room. "I am solely your uncompromising megalomaniac," she corrected smoothly, pulling my weight gently down onto the sofa beside her. I leaned my heavy head against her tailored shoulder, looking down at the perfect, sleeping face of our beautiful daughter. Our 10-year, fiercely bitter professional rivalry had officially ended in the most spectacular, terrifyingly romantic surrender imaginable. I closed my eyes, completely and utterly satisfied with the brilliant, flawless masterpiece my greatest enemy had ultimately built for us.